Let's welcome on our guest line Senator Lindsey Graham, a longtime friend of the Mike Gallagher Show, who joins us. Senator Graham, great having you back on the program, although obviously, as I know you are acutely aware, many Americans are troubled, stressed, worried about all of the stuff that's happening. But it is true, isn't it, that when we face these tough times, the goodwill of mankind always seems to emerge?
You're right. To the victims and their families, those who were killed and injured, our heart breaks for you. To the people of Boston, your strength in the face of adversity makes us proud. To the law enforcement and intelligence communities who are trying to protect us against this great evil called radical Islam, God bless you.
Let's talk, Senator Graham. Absolutely. Let's talk about some of the legal questions that people are asking about. The New York Times, not surprisingly, blasts you today.
Good.
If you can be judged by that, it's a badge of honor. How do I get the same kind of condemnation? But the Times editorial board says that your reckless approach towards suggesting that this young bombing suspect should be treated as an enemy combatant makes a mockery of the superb civilian police work that led to the suspect's capture. The law enforcement system solved the case swiftly and efficiently. Evidently, the New York Times thinks that this young 19-year-old suspect ought to be treated, I don't know, like somebody who bumped off a 7-Eleven rather than a jihadist.
Well, that's the point. I could care less about the criminal case. A first-year law student could convict this guy. Don't you think most Americans want him to survive for one reason, two reasons: to bring him to justice, to give him a fair trial. He deserves a lawyer in the criminal justice system. The lawyer who defends him will be doing America a great service if they do it vigorously. He will go to federal court. He's not eligible for military commissions. I wrote the Military Commission Act of 2009. What I'm worried about is, what does he know about future attacks? Mm-hmm. Do you believe we're at war with radical Islam?
I do.
Okay, then as a nation, we have the right to defend ourselves if we're under threat. The reason they set off the bombs is because they've become radicalized. They consider us a Christian nation, a colonial power. We're infidels. They don't want our money. They don't want our property. They want to destroy our way of life. Mm-hmm. When we're at war with the Germans and the Japanese, you had American citizens who collaborated with the Nazis. They helped the saboteurs who landed at Long Island. They were going to blow up a bunch of infrastructure. The FBI caught the American citizens working with the Nazis. They were tried in military court and hung. Their case went to the Supreme Court before the death penalty was imposed, and the court said, yes, when you join the enemy, even as an American citizen, you take up hostile acts against the nation, you can be held under the law of war. Mm-hmm. You had an American citizen, Hamdi, captured in Afghanistan, who was held under the law of war for years. And in that case, our Supreme Court said the law of holding one of our own as an enemy combatant stands to this day. You had Padilla, who was held by the Bush administration for working with al-Qaeda for 4 years. He went to the Fourth Circuit. They said you can hold enemies of the nation off the battlefield, including an American citizen. Mm-hmm. So here's what I'm worried about. I want to interrogate him for intelligence gathering purposes. I want the FBI and the CIA to spend time with him to find out about future attacks. That information can't be used in court. It can be used to defend ourselves. And look at what the New York Times is suggesting. The only way we can talk to him about future attacks is through the criminal justice system, where his lawyer controls the conversation.
Absolutely.
Do you really want to turn over intelligence gathering to the terrorist and his lawyer?
And of course, you're preaching to the choir. I happen to agree 1,000% with you, Senator Graham. But what do you say to the American, the person watching all this, who's worried about the so-called slippery slope, who says, listen, like it or not, this guy is an American citizen. He should be treated as such. There shouldn't be an exemption because he allegedly set off this bomb.
He should be treated under the domestic criminal law as a criminal suspect, mm-hmm. given all the rights of a criminal suspect. The question is, if he has sided with the enemy, if he's become a radical jihadist, working with radical Islamic groups to kill us all, can you treat him as an enemy combatant? I can tell you this, in every war we've been in the past, when American citizens sided with the enemy, they were held as enemy combatants. How in the world could you hang 3 people who helped the Nazis if they weren't enemy combatants in military court? This is not even an issue. I've been a military lawyer for 30 years. You got 3 cases right on point. And what if it were so? What if it was so that, don't you think you'd be incentivizing al-Qaeda to find American citizens? If we had laws that said we could never hold an American citizen for intelligence gathering purposes without a lawyer, then you're making an American citizen the prime suspect, the prime target of al-Qaeda to radicalize. We're at war. And to those who believe in the criminal justice system, count me in. But to those who say we're not at war, count me out. To those who suggest that this country can't sit down with a terrorist and find out what they know about future attacks without a lawyer, that is not the law, and if it were, it would be crazy.
Well, and Senator, what's also crazy, after we had a guy who had business cards that said he was a soldier of Allah, Major Nadel Hassan,
Right.
who was screaming Allah Akbar as he slaughtered our soldiers at Fort Hood, this administration characterized that as an act of workplace violence.
Well, look at their record here. That Christmas Day bomber, remember that guy who tried to blow up a plane over Detroit?
Yep.
They Mirandized him in 45 minutes, never declared him an enemy combatant, had to get his parents to suggest to him to cooperate. The Times Square bomber, he was with the Taliban in Pakistan, never declared an enemy combatant. Osama bin Laden's son-in-law, who was the spokesman for al-Qaeda after 9/11, we finally caught him. He's been given a lawyer. He's pleading not guilty. He should be declared as an enemy combatant. We should have the FBI and the CIA interrogating him for intelligence gathering purposes. We're trying to do 2 things here. We're trying to prosecute a crime, and he'll get every right associated with being a criminal defendant, and we're also trying to prevent a future attack. When you're gathering intelligence, you don't use the evidence against the defendant. You used it to protect us. So the New York Times doesn't want to admit we're at war. This is really about that.
Yeah, that's
they don't believe that they believe that radical Islamists are just some criminal enterprise. They don't want to say the war on terror is a reality. They don't want to admit that the enemy is trying to attack us here in our own backyard. If we don't treat this as a war, more Americans are going to die unnecessarily. And every enemy combatant, Mike, has their day in court. You can't hold a person as an enemy combatant without taking them to a federal judge in a habeas proceeding, and the government has to prove you have evidence that they're an enemy combatant.
And let's be clear, I mean, this isn't just the New York Times, but this does seem to be sort of the liberal worldview, again, back to the Obama administration and many at the top in Washington who seem to try to de-emphasize terrorism.
If I were president of the United States, I would say there's ample evidence to suggest that the survivor is a radical jihadist who has overseas connections, and I would say we're going to hold him, at least preliminarily, as an enemy combatant. We're going to interrogate him without a lawyer present. We're not going to torture him. We're going to try to find out what he knows. On the criminal side, he has to go to federal court. He's not eligible for military commission trial. I would respect that process, but I would declare this person a prime target to be an enemy combatant so we can defend ourselves.
Right.
And this administration has their 0 for 3. They don't capture anybody. They haven't put anyone in Gitmo. You got Osama bin Laden's son-in-law, for God's sakes, who is a treasure trove of information. I'm going to introduce a sense of the Senate resolution asking every senator to vote as to whether or not the administration should designate him as an enemy combatant.
Good.
This guy is a treasure trove. This survivor could be a treasure trove to prevent a future attack.
You know, visiting with Senator Lindsey Graham, and I think, you know, Senator, you characterize it very well. You either believe we're at war with radical Islam or you don't.
And can I just say, sure. No American citizen, with it comes responsibilities. No American citizen has the right to take up arms against our nation and kill Americans without being treated under the law of war. That would be, it's not immunity. American citizenship doesn't make you immune from being held or killed, captured or killed under the law of war. When you side with the enemy, then you risk being killed or captured. That's always been the law.
Final question, Senator. I know how busy you are. The London Mirror reports that the FBI, there are over 1,000 FBI operatives who are working to track down a sleeper cell, 12 terrorists strong, linked to the Boston Marathon bomb brothers. Police believe that these brothers were specially trained to carry out the attack. The Mirror says that a source close to the investigation said, "We have no doubt the brothers were not acting alone." Your suspicions, your thoughts, Senator Graham, on whether these were two lone wolves or whether they were being aided?
They had a small munitions factory. They were making IEDs. They were throwing grenades and pipe bombs out of the car. The one brother went overseas for 6 months in an area ripe with radical Islamists. There's now evidence that the imam in Boston, who was a friend of Anwar al-Awlaki, had associations with these guys. To think that these two guys had no help, to me, doesn't pass the smell test. And how do you know if they did? You have to have time, Mike,
right,
to investigate. And when you're at war, you don't let defense lawyers tell you what you can and can't do. We don't have to beg the defense lawyer, please let us talk to your client and give him a life sentence to talk to him. That's not the law. When you're at war, you can talk to people who have information, national security information, to protect the nation. And the questions the FBI and the CIA need to ask of this guy, are there other people, fall clearly in the national security lane, not the criminal justice lane.
Sure. Have you heard that this the 19-year-old the news reports say he's beginning to communicate at least by writing down on paper because he apparently tried to kill himself. Have you heard any information about it?
I have heard, can't confirm it, that it is the possibilities are beginning to emerge that he can communicate with us.
Right.
And we have interrogation techniques that are not torture to get to know these people. And how did we find bin Laden? We held people at Gitmo for years. This guy can't go to Gitmo because he's an American citizen, but we held him as enemy combatants, getting to know him, putting the puzzle together. All I'm suggesting is that until we find out who these guys really were and what they're part of, let's don't shoot ourselves in the foot as a nation. Let's preserve the right we've had for decades to find intelligence from suspects who are potentially involved with our enemies. So wouldn't it be a shame to shut this system down and turn it over to a criminal defense lawyer? Wouldn't that be just really idiotic?
It'd be sick.
It would be
sick.
Ill-advised, because this guy has a treasure trove potentially of what may be coming our way.
Right.
And this is the future, Mike. The future is hitting us in our own backyard with American citizens being radicalized.
Listen, I take this very seriously. As you know, besides spending a lot of time in the beautiful upstate of South Carolina, I also spend a lot of time, I walk through Times Square almost every day of my life. Now, let me tell you something. These kinds of attacks, Americans are vulnerable, and we better get this right, Senator Graham.
Yes, sir. I couldn't say it better. I don't want a police state, but I want a nation where the police can protect us. And this is not a law enforcement exercise I'm talking about. This is an intelligence-gathering national security exercise to protect us against future attacks driven by radical Islamic view. They don't want our money. They don't want our property. They want to kill our way of life, just like the Germans and the Japanese.
Well, Senator Lindsey Graham, as all politicians do, you take your share of lumps. But in my view, nobody